Hello, welcome back to Putting the Story in History. Today we're going to talk about two countries at once, one from a long time ago and one from right now, and their similarities, why they're so similar. Because I think that there certainly are some, and I think drawing these parallels will be helpful moving forward, right? We're going to use history to maybe think about what could be done in the future. So the two countries we're going to talk about today are the Roman Empire and the United States, and the similarities between them um, currently and when Rome fell. Maybe you'll see the connection in just a few minutes here. So let's get going. So if you look at the factors that most historians attribute to the fall of the Roman Empire, you can see that a lot of them line up with things that are currently happening in the United States. Um, Here's a list of some of these things: economic inequality, uh, labor issues, especially with wages, military spread too thin, tax evasion, corrupt government, people not trusting their government, legislative corruption. I think there's a fine argument that could be made that any one of those things is currently happening in the United States, and these are the things that eventually led to Rome collapsing. So I'd like to take a look at all these different factors and see how they are playing out in both Rome and the United States, and maybe we could draw some conclusions about that um, in this video. So first off, let's talk a little bit about economic inequality. In Rome, before the fall of the empire, the rich were getting richer, and the regular Roman was not really seeing much of that um, increase. And that was mostly because the Roman Empire was set up to help the elite and not to help the average Roman citizen. So historians calculated what's called a Gini coefficient. And for those of you who aren't economists, me included, I had to look it up myself. A Gini coefficient is basically just like a statistic that was created. It takes a whole bunch of different things, economic data from different places, and puts it together into one number that measures income inequality. Now, for the Gini coefficient, 1 is perfectly unequal and 100 is perfectly equal. So if you have a 100 Gini coefficient, that means wealth is distributed equally amongst all citizens in your country. And if you have a 1, that means it's incredibly unequal. So you can imagine what that would feel like. Rome at the fall was calculated to have a 43, so right near the middle. But on the side of perfectly unequal, right? So not fantastic. Now, if we look at the United States, um, the current COVID pandemic, I would say, has made it pretty apparent that the rich benefit from our system much more than the average American does. You know, people like Elon Musk and whoever that guy is who runs Amazon, I try not to remember his name, um, have been making all this money. Meanwhile, average Americans are starving and they can't pay their rent and whatever, right? The Gini coefficient for the United States is currently around 48, so really close to that of the Roman Empire when it fell. So you can see that we have very similar situations here. Now, when it came to labor and wages, these differ a little bit, and that's mostly because Rome was working with slave labor. And slavery is illegal in the United States now. We don't do slavery, um, and so that kind of isn't comparable. But if you do think about it, right, the United States, the average worker is not being compensated enough to live off of, and that's why there's such a big push for a minimum wage increase right now, right? Because the minimum wage has not kept up with the increase of standard of living, and so people have to work 2 or 3 jobs to pay their bills. Um, so you could see how those are kind of similar, right? Um, the people who are working aren't getting the benefits of the labor that they are doing. Now, the next one I had mentioned in the beginning was that the military was spread rather thin, and that was really true in Rome's time, as Rome had to defend all this large territory, and they couldn't really afford, nor did they have enough citizens to create their army anymore. So they were mostly relying on recruits from other areas, so unloyal people who who weren't necessarily loyal to what they were trying to accomplish, right? So they had their military spread out very thin, trying to hold all this territory. Well, the United States is doing the same thing roughly. We don't control a lot of territory, but our military is involved in almost every part of the globe for various different reasons. And now there are lots of merit to a lot of the things that the U.S. military does. However, I think a lot of people could agree that we have spread ourselves a little too thin. We don't have to be the world's policeman, at least not by ourselves. Um, and so, or nor do we need to be involved in wars that don't really concern us. So, so in that case, right, our military, although strong, not gonna say we're not, right? We do definitely have some military advantages over a lot of other countries, right? But we do have ourselves spread pretty thin, right? We're all over the place where we could be more concentrated, a little bit more cost effective. Another thing that Rome had a big issue with was tax evasion, right? The people who were getting richer were also getting rich because they weren't paying their taxes. The wealthy evaded tax collectors by setting up small fiefdoms in the countryside, and they basically just were like, nope, sorry, you can't come and collect your taxes because this is my territory, get off of it. In the United States, rich Americans do the same thing. They create shell corporations, um, or they hide their money overseas in these tax havens, and make it almost impossible for them to pay taxes. Right? If you look at our current president for one more day, um, right? He hasn't paid taxes in like 8 years. Same thing with, I remember his name now, Jeff Bezos. Amazon paid zero taxes last year. That's ridiculous. They're a multi-billion-dollar company. But they're not paying any taxes. They're not helping the government, and that's an issue, right? It's hard to run a country without any income. So that there is another similarity. And then let's talk a little bit about leadership. And then we can do, yeah, we'll just talk about leadership. We'll be done there. So in Rome, as the empire continued on and on and on, the emperors became less and less successful, and sometimes they would only be in charge for less than a year, which isn't exactly great. And these emperors were they weren't great. They were corrupt. They were willing to give out favors to whoever served them best. And this corruption kind of eroded faith in the government because the people who were running it were no longer trustworthy. And in the United States, at least over the last 4 years, that seemed incredibly true as well, right? We had a leader who wouldn't tell the truth, and who would give away power to people who suited him, and they were backed up by Mitch McConnell, a man in the Senate who was willing to let them do whatever they wanted. And I think that's really eroded the faith in what our government is capable of, seeing it being abused that way. Um, and so this kind of corrupt leadership, um, in both Rome and in the United States, has eroded faith in the government. Um, and people no longer really have the same kind of belief that the government is doing what's in our best interest, right? It's seeming more and more that it's not. Um, so that's not particularly great either. So if you look at all these different factors, and how they play together and how similar our situation is to that of the Roman Empire, it makes you start to wonder what's going to happen to our country, right? If Rome fell under these pressures, what's to stop the United States from doing the same thing? So going into this new year, 2021, and this new presidency tomorrow, all right, 120, that's his day, his first day in office. Um, it's going to become more and more apparent that we need to hold the government accountable, stop this kind of corruption from happening, and make sure that everybody is paying their fair share in taxes to make sure that we can avoid the kind of outcomes that the Roman Empire saw millennia ago. Okay. Um, People say that the past repeats itself, and it does because people don't learn from it. And this is an example of when knowing something about the past could be beneficial to us in the future, right? Knowing about these things that happened to Rome could help us stave off the potential collapse of our own country, or at least the inherent weakening of it. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of Putting the Story in History. Next time, we'll be talking about something entirely different because that's how this series works. We'll talk about something maybe more modern. or maybe not. We'll find out. I don't plan that far in advance. So I'll see you guys later. Have a great day.